And most of the fear, I think, for entrepreneurs, for me in any event, is around money. How do we pay our salaries? You know, people rely on you.
Definitely.
And the fear is not, I can do it or I can't do it. It's a little bit in the how, you know, how are we actually going to do this?
Welcome back to the Confident Alchemist podcast. The podcast where bold women stop playing small and start building the business and the life that they are meant to have. Today, I have something very special for you. Instead of me just talking to you, I've brought in someone whose story I think is going to inspire you and challenge you in the best possible way. I'm here today with Lizette Snelgar, and her journey is absolutely fascinating. Lizette spent decades, and I mean decades, building an incredible career in human resources. We're talking about leadership roles at Standard Bank, Weber Wenzel, Deloitte. She was on management boards, executive committees, driving strategies, initiatives for some of the biggest companies in South Africa. And then, at a point in her career when most people will think about cruising towards retirement, Lizette made a decision that surprised everyone around her. She left the corporate world to become a franchise owner, opening not one, but two Sorbet salons with her sister. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, Debbie, that doesn't sound like a typical entrepreneurship story. She went from corporate to a franchise. But here's what I want you to understand. And this is why I'm so excited to share Lizette's story with you. Entrepreneurship isn't just about starting something completely from scratch. It's about taking ownership of your life, your income, and your impact. It's about making brave decisions that align with who you're becoming. Today, we are going to dive deep into Lizette's story and decision-making process, the challenges she faced, and the insights she gained through this journey. So whether you're considering a career pivot or thinking about franchising, or just wondering what it takes to take a brave leap later in your career, this conversation is going to give you so much to think about. Lizette,
Hi, Debbie.
welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good. So Lizette, let's get to the big question. I think everybody's wondering about this one. You had this incredible corporate career, decades of success, leadership, positions, prestigious companies that you worked for. What was the moment or the series of moments that made you think, you know what? I'm ready to do something completely different. Take us inside this decision-making process.
Well, Debbie, thank you very much for having me this morning. I really appreciate it. You just reminding me of my time in the corporate space, giving me a little bit of anxiety. So I don't know if it's you or whether it's a reminder. But yeah, the corporate space is anxiety provoking at the best of time. And then the decision to move into entrepreneurship.
Yes.
I wish I can tell you that it was a thoughtful and well-considered decision, but it wasn't.
Okay.
There's a little story behind that as well.
Tell us, yeah.
It was actually a split-second decision.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so which I can share with you and the listeners and viewers. So my corporate career, I was incredibly privileged. I worked with incredible people, but nevertheless it came with a huge amount of stress. And you know, at a stage one has to say to yourself, look, what is important? One of the stories I always tell is that my husband took us on an amazing trip in the Maldives, and we arrived in the Maldives, and the first thing I asked was whether there was Wi-Fi. And people were like, why are you looking for Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I have to work.
Oh, wow, yeah.
This is in the Maldives. And I think at that moment as well, my husband and I had a conversation, and we just said perhaps there are different ways in which one can feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
So I decided to take some time out, and I was very fortunate to have a extended sabbatical for about 2 years. So that was great.
Yeah.
And then again, I remember this extremely well. We were moving house. Our kids were immigrating, so things were a little all over the place.
Yes.
And I had a phone call from my sister to say, there's a sorbet for sale. And I had a phone conversation with her, and we decided to buy the sorbet. So that's why, when I say it was a split-second decision, it really was, amongst many other things going on in your life.
Yes.
And that's how we made the decision. Ultimately, we didn't buy that particular salon, but it opened up a discussion with the franchisor on opportunities for us. So, that was there was no process. It was a phone call that changed things.
Lizette, that is so interesting. And I think a lot of our listeners are actually also assuming that a lot of the time a decision to take a leap is about burnout and toxicity. But I do also think that sometimes it is just a personal decision to actually just take this leap because of personal and well-being. So what do you think was your major decision in making that choice?
It was, I think, a combination of professional and personal, as you've just mentioned. I think professionally, I felt that I was very fortunate I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. I worked with incredible people in the teams that I had the privilege of running. I'd worked with wonderful leaders in the corporate space. But from a personal perspective, my husband and I made a decision that we want to spend a bit more time together. He's retired, so that was great. And the 2 years sabbatical was a fantastic opportunity to take a breath, get back a little bit of balance in one's life. It's never perfect. Doesn't matter what you do. But so the main push was actually personal. To say, look, and then to keep an open mind. Because it was never a case of saying, well, I'm never going to work again, because my husband and I continued to do a little bit of consulting work. We did a little bit of work for banks in Africa. That wasn't on my CV, if I remember correctly. A little bit of work for banks, as I said, in Africa on leadership and strategy, which was great. And then COVID, so that changed things again.
Definitely,
But it was great to be able to keep an open mind about opportunities that may arise.
How did you know that you are ready to trust yourself with this decision?
That is that wasn't on the script then.
Because it's such a brave thing you need to take, going from the corporate, stability to trusting yourself that, you can still have fulfillment in life. And it's such a big decision. But how did you know? Because you need to trust yourself that you can do this, that you can sustain yourself and have the drive to move forward. So how did you know that you can trust yourself?
At that stage, my sister and I started spending a bit of time together working on a business plan, albeit, at a very kind of basic level at that stage. And we said, well, what are the skills that we need if we do want to pursue this seriously? And a lot of the skills that I had acquired in the corporate space, I felt confident that I could actually use it in a new business, despite it being so different.
Exactly. Yeah.
And those are the things like business knowledge, business acumen, because even though I spent most of my career in HR, I was always exposed to strategy, to leadership, to business knowledge, to financial management. Even the people I worked with learned a lot from them. So I felt confident in those skills, the kind of financial management, tech, business knowledge, tech broadly. And then in my time at Weber Wenzel, I actually spent quite a lot of time with the person who was our marketing exec for a variety of reasons, just because I had such an interest in it. So I felt that, even from a marketing or social media perspective, there were some things that we understood and we could use it in our new business.
Yes. Yeah.
So I felt that I had a skill set or some of the skills that I could use in new business, but equally, there were some skills that were on the, well, I don't really know how to do that list.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I am fortunate that my sister had some of those skills, but there was still, obviously, there's always a bit of a gap. So one needs to say, what are those skills and how do I actually acquire them?
And that's very important because, our listeners out there, there's some that think that they've built this career and they have all these skills. And sometimes they make the assumption that they're never going to use it again. So it's very important to tell our listeners that you can actually bring your skill set into the franchising or into your new entrepreneurship. And there's something that's going to actually give you an edge about somebody starting just from scratch and has got no skill sets. So what advice can you give our listeners about, bringing that skill set in and making it your own to actually, boost your new entrepreneurship?
I think, firstly, as I said, you do need to recognize that you do have a certain skill set.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Because even with entrepreneurship, and even if it is completely new, a different industry, you don't really start from scratch if you come out of a corporate space.
Yes, definitely.
You bring a skill set, you bring knowledge, you bring confidence.
Yes.
Because the corporate space, especially in HR, is hard. You work very hard at building relationships and navigating politics, and so those skill sets, you do have them.
Yes.
The slightly more tricky bit is to say, how do I apply them, moderate them, change them, enhance them for entrepreneurship? And there's pretty much only one way, and that is like doing it.
Exactly.
Getting it in there. And making mistakes.
Definitely. It's always about trial and error.
Absolutely. But I think what the corporate experience also gives you is to say, if I do make a mistake, how do I fix it as quickly as possible? And how do I, get into the next decision or the next effort or tactic, whatever it is that I need to do, a little faster, a little better. So the learning curve is quite steep. But don't forget about the skills that you do have and recognize them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I need to ask you about the fear factor, because I know our listeners are dealing with this fear. So when you're established in corporate, there is this golden handcuff situation. The salary, the benefits, the status, the predictability. But when you're considering this leap, what fears came up for you? And more importantly, how did you navigate through these fears?
Listen, there's nothing as fear-inducing as well as the corporate world. Let's just put that out there.
That is it.
You stand up and you do a presentation. You have to ask for money with your executive or your management board. That is fear. So, and I'm not suggesting that the kind of fear factor in entrepreneurship is by any means less. But I do think, in my experience, and it's the experience of one journey into entrepreneurship, I felt that we were set up to deal with the fear that actually comes with it.
Okay.
I guess it's the unknown a little bit. It's a very different industry.
Yes.
And people look at it and they say, it's the beauty industry,
Yes.
It's
a lot of assumptions.
A lot of assumptions around the beauty industry. And
how hard can it be?
Exactly.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
We do hair and nails. I mean, how difficult can that be?
Exactly.
Let me tell you, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things around that. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of risks around that. So... But just to get back to your question around fear, I'm very fortunate that we have a very good support structure in our family. And then, of course, I have my sister who works with me. So when she feels the fear, I can moderate that. And when I feel it, she can moderate it. So, it's a good relationship. And then also just to be practical about things. Just look at it and say, why is this happening? And most of the fear, I think, for entrepreneurs, for me in any event, is around money.
Definitely. Month end.
Exactly. And targets. Because at the very basic level, it is a sales and service environment.
Yes.
And you look at day one every month and you start with zero.
Yes, you do.
Literally with zero. So that is the big fear in our space. Is how do we pay our salaries? People rely on you.
Definitely.
How do I make sure that I pay my suppliers? How do I negotiate?
Yes, exactly.
Suppliers.
Yeah.
So that really is, and the fear is not I can do it or I can't do it. It's a little bit in the how.
Yes.
How are we actually going to do this? And it relates to those kind of things.
Yeah, because like you said, corporate companies, you can say what it is, but the golden handcuffs is there. You've got your stability. You know you're going to get a paycheck at the month end. You've got your benefits. But I always say sometimes you have to consider that staying with the golden handcuffs or creating something beautiful for yourself.
Yeah.
And taking that brave leap, that's where the fear comes in.
Yeah.
Because you don't know, in being an entrepreneur, you don't have that stability. Unless your company is well established and you've got a flow of income every month, that's a different thing. But if, like you said, we're working toward targets, and not just monthly targets, yearly targets, and your business needs to grow.
Yes.
Otherwise, why do you have a business?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's very true. It is that kind of leap of faith that you have to make. But when you first approached me just to have a conversation, it was around entrepreneurship, and a little earlier we also chatted about entrepreneurship, and it sounds like quite a fancy term.
Yes.
And it is a nice title. It's a label. It's really, what do you do? Well, I'm an entrepreneur. It sounds really fancy. It's a really great label. And at the end of the day, we all just work, heads down, and you just work.
Definitely.
Towards that label.
Towards that label. Yes.
But perhaps to wear that label with pride. But it takes a bit of courage to get there.
Definitely
courage and confidence.
Confidence, yes. One thing that's unique about your story is that you made this leap with your sister, Liana, your business partner, as well as family. That adds a whole new layer of complexity and opportunity. So how has that partnership dynamic actually worked for you? And what have you learned about mixing family and business?
Look, each family meeting turns into a Sorbet meeting, of course. Or each family gathering turns into a Sorbet meeting. No, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but yes. And the reason for that is, I think my sister and I are very fortunate in that we have a very good role model in my dad, who his whole life was a true entrepreneur. So we have a great role model.
Yes,
he's always run small businesses. And Leona worked for him for quite a long time.
Yes.
So it's kind of in blood.
Yes. But it helps. Yes.
I realized that only much later, but it's there. So I think we both appreciate how unique the opportunity is, but equally the hard work, the complexity.
Definitely.
Again, we are very fortunate is that we have very different skill sets.
Yes.
So I always say to her, the two of us make one very perfect franchise partner.
Yes, exactly.
Because, I bring a certain set of skills and she brings a certain set of skills.
Yes.
And she respects what I bring to the business and I respect what she brings to the business. It doesn't mean that we don't disagree.
Of course.
And that, we go without it with, like a couple of hours not talking to each other. So that happens.
Yes, of course.
But at the end of the day, right in the beginning, we agreed, what is the goal? What do I want to have? Or what do I want to get out of the business? What does she want to get out of the business? Yeah. And when there are things that we perhaps don't agree with, or we're not sure, we kind of say to each other, well, what is the goal? What is the goal?
Yes.
Whatever we do, does it support that goal or does it detract from it? That's the test.
Yes.
So, but I guess it is tricky, and for many entrepreneurs, you just need to to do a little bit of reading, to know that often working with family is a complex and difficult situation.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you. What advice do you actually have for listeners who might also considering, mixing business with family? Because, if you don't have a great dynamic, as siblings, it can actually turn out, in a bad way if you don't have a good understanding.
I think first and foremost, choose a business partner. If that business partner then happens to be a family member, so to choose a family member first, I think would be a little tricky.
Yes.
But when my sister approached me and she said, look, there's this opportunity, I looked at her as a business partner and not as a sibling.
Yes.
Sometimes, of course, it is a grey area. But when we talk about the business, we are business partners. And, we try and kind of compartmentalize that. So we talk about a business and there may be some personal stuff, that we want to talk about. And we keep that to the last section of any discussion we have. So,
business first, family later.
Yes. And that's worked for us. But I think first and foremost, for me, when we ultimately made the decision and agreed to invest, it was looking at her as a business partner. And it's worked for us. So otherwise we wouldn't have done a second salon.
Yes.
If we didn't feel that we could continue to work together.
Here's my final question, and this is a big one. After decades in corporate, where success is sometimes measured by titles, salary increases, the size of your team, the prestige of your company, how do you define success now? What does winning look like for you in this new chapter of your life?
I think just to reflect for a moment, Debbie, on the corporate space, because I think a lot of your listeners and viewers probably do work in corporate in some form or another. You do have that, you have the salary, and even if you take a couple of days off, you may not be feeling well, some sick leave, or you go on holiday, you still get paid. You know that if I perform well, bonuses, share options, all of those things, it is hugely attractive and right.
Yes.
Because
you're giving the labor, you're giving the energy.
Absolutely.
You get compensated.
For all of that.
Yeah.
And then, I always looked at small businesses, and people call it a small business. And I thought to myself, well, why would you call it a small business? Yes, I mean, from a business perspective, obviously it is small. But I've now realized that it's the small wins.
Yes, it is.
that define success. In the corporate space, you have this huge deliverables, huge projects. Everything is big and bold. In a small business, every positive comment from a guest makes it worthwhile.
Definitely.
Every positive comment on social media, every well done from the franchisor, from your area manager, every day where you do really, really well. You've done a lot of treatments, or you've done a lot of retail. Today was better than yesterday.
Yes.
Those are the small wins. Or this month was better than the previous month, or this year was better than the previous year. And then, of course, money.
Of course.
Because we always seem to kind of dance around the topic of money.
Definitely.
But we shouldn't.
No, we shouldn't.
We should absolutely say it is important.
It is. Why do we start a business is because the money is going to give you that freedom.
Yeah.
And that is, my personal reason why I also started, my own business was, first of all, was the freedom.
Yes.
I hated asking for leave just to do something for my family. Take my mom to the dentist.
Yes.
And then, you were only allowed to take leave in December when the factory closes. And so I said, the only way I'm going to have that own freedom is if I make money that can buy me that freedom.
Yeah.
And that is it. So money is sometimes a very icky topic for a lot of people, but it's not. And it actually is, it's a way to actually create that freedom in your life.
Yeah. I think one also has to be, you talk about freedom, even running your own business, even being an entrepreneur, you have to constantly guard against giving up some of the goals and decisions, because our business that we run is a 7-day a week business.
Yes.
We are open from 9 in the morning until 6 at night. So it is actually very easy to give up those freedoms.
Yes.
Let me just quickly check how many appointments we have today. Let me just quickly check how much money we've made today. Instead of saying, no, I wanted to do this because I wanted to spend more time with family, or I wanted to not work before 9 in the morning because I wanted to go to gym and I want to have breakfast with my husband.
Yes.
It is so easy to fall into that trap again, to give that up. And one has to constantly actually guard against that.
Yeah, definitely. But I always say, in the beginning, it's like having a baby. Business is you have to attend to it much more carefully in the beginning. And it is sometimes, but at the end of the day, I always say, with all the extra time I put in, at the end of the day, it's going to benefit me. Not somebody else, not a corporate guy buying this new house or car. At the end of the day, it's my business, and the time I spend in that business is actually going to benefit me.
Yeah. I think it's very true. I mean, that is, always just to keep that in mind as well. So, because you can get sucked in to all sorts of things. And often those things are on the periphery. And you have to get back to the core goal, the core reason.
Yes. That's about it. Yeah. Lizette, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think what strikes me most about your journey is it challenges a lot of assumptions of what entrepreneurship looks like. And also when it's appropriate to make these big changes in our life. Yeah. To all the confidence alchemists listening today, I hope Lizette's story has given you today something to think about. So here are the key takeaways I want you to remember. First, entrepreneurship doesn't mean you have to start from scratch. Sometimes it actually means finding a proven model, like franchising, that allows you to be the owner by still leveraging the systems that's already working. Secondly, your corporate experience isn't something that you should leave behind. It's an asset that you can bring forward. All those years of leadership, strategy, people management, those skills can transfer and give you advantage than someone just starting from scratch. Thirdly, it is never too late to redefine success on your own terms. Whether you're in your 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s, you get to decide what winning looks like in your life. Here's what I want you to do for listening after this episode. Take some time out and really think how you are currently defining success. Are those definitions truly yours? Or are they definitions that were handed by your industry, your family, society? And if you could redefine success completely for yourself, if you could design a life, a career that is truly aligned with who you are, what would that look like? I would love to hear from you, so please send me messages on my social media and tell me how success is currently looking for you. I would also like to invite you, ladies, to join our Confident Alchemist community. It's a free community online of strong women sharing their ideas, their businesses, and just getting together to help each other to become confident alchemists. I hope you found some golden nuggets in this episode and that you really truly define success on your own terms. Then join me next week for another dose of boldness, transformation, and truth.